Okay, so thank you to everybody for being here today. I have the wonderful opportunity to introduce you to Prof. Willie from the University of Fort Hare. He will be presenting on dismantling narratives and can we move away from weird psychology, please? So thank you everybody for joining us. I appreciate that you've switched off your microphones and videos so that we save our data. And I give the floor over to Prof. Willie. Enjoy.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I am assuming everybody can see my presentation. Fatima, is it fine, eh?
Yes,
Okay,
it's perfect.
perfect.
Hi, Prof.
Okay,
Yes, we can see the presentation.
perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It is raining in East London. So on Monday, we had 30 degrees weather. And today we wake up to some rain, so it's a very mixed bag that we've been having. So I want to talk to you about this topic here about moving away from weird psychology. And I've tried not to make the presentation abstract and too high level that we spend the whole time talking about theory and all of that. I've tried to focus on what I think are some ideas that I have learned, my journey as an academic and my journey as somebody who's still learning, and some of the pointers that I can share with you concerning some of the things that we're going to talk about. And I've titled the talk, Dismantling Narratives, Can We Move Away from Weird Psychology? Now, some of you would know that weird psychology is a term that is recognized. I mean, if you just do a search in the literature and also the databases, you would know that this is inference usually given to the roots or the underpinnings of psychology being grounded in the following tenets, which is a Western psychology, educated elite, in industrialized economies, rich economies for that matter, and also often we could put in brackets the democratic, because for some people, that can always be debated as to what is democratic and what is not democratic. But what I then try to do in this presentation, I want to put myself as a person who is at the center of that weirdness, if you like, and some of the lessons and experiences that I've learned. So this is really an experiential type of talk where I go in depth to some of the things that I've gone through as an academic, as a scholar, in view of the concept of psychology being weird. My background is in industrial psychology or work psychology, some would like to call it. So I will borrow from those examples of the weirdness in view of the experiences that I have gone through in terms of how I navigate past that. So when does the weirdness start? Well, I think the weirdness usually starts first year psychology 101. So we get introduced to all these amazing characters, if you like, Donald Super, and his idea of the vocational self-concept crystallization. We get introduced to all these guys who are so-called fathers of psychology or social science, who are great, usually men for that matter, whose ideas become the subject of what we try to cram in our residence rooms so that we pass that test that's written between 5 and 7 or 7:30 at night on a cold winter's evening, just to impress our lecturers and facilitators and tutors as to showing that we've got an understanding of that. And the weirdness continues. Second year, you get introduced to more weird characters and more weird contexts. You start learning about prison experiments. You start learning about challenges that have often characterized Western psychology and how people navigate past that. And all of this is part and parcel of trying to make us all get ready to become better suited to the challenges that characterize psychology as a discipline. And then when we go to our honors year of study, we get introduced to the idea that you must now work on a treatise or on a mini dissertation, some would call it. And in that year, you must identify a problem, and then when you sit and present your idea to a committee, you get told ideas that, what scale are you going to use to measure career identity? And you have no idea what that means, but you're told that, well, you must find a scale. And while you're at it trying to find a scale, just remember, your scale must conform to certain standards and belief points around the Cronbach alpha reliability and validity. And after you've done that, you measure that, and then you take the scale that has been developed again in the framing of the weirdness, and you take that scale, you go to your local community in Khayelitsha or your local community in Dantsane, and you say, well, I'm an honors student. I'm trying to look at the career identity issues that are characterizing adults in the South African context. I've got this questionnaire. Please fill out the questionnaire. And then your sample takes the questionnaire, and they have to navigate through weirdness as they try to answer your questionnaire. They sometimes get asked questions which they may not understand. They fill out the questionnaire and sometimes fill it out just to get you off their backs to say, look, move on. There we go. We filled out your questionnaire, move on. You analyze the data and the results come out. If you're lucky, you publish the paper. It gets published in one of the leading journals in the South African context. And there, you're going to go to the next level, repeat again, master's, PhD, and so forth and so forth. And then you become an academic, like some of us are, and you go through weirdness again, and you merely perpetuate this idea of psychology as a discipline that's rooted in instruments, theories, theoretical postulations that are Western, for a certain sample group, for a certain population group in terms of geographical expansion, but also for a certain grouping of people who are elite and have access to all of that. So that's psychology as being weird. So I want to then borrow into 5 key moments in my career where I have realized that I must stop being weird. I must start pathing and framing a different form of reality. And I've put these epochs, if you like, in different categorization of embarrassment and awakening, going back to my roots, the issue of measurement, and proudly African research that engages with the other. On number 5, I'm trying to bring 2 points there, not just African research, but there is necessity for African research to go back and now challenge the very idea of weirdness, and not just African research that's just there to be positioned as the end right of all, but it must also be framed in challenging this idea of weirdness. So here is my journey and here is my experience. So the first of these experiences is the embarrassment. So let's go forward a bit. I want to introduce you to the 3 supervisors that I had for my PhD study. Professor Kirsty Ball, Dr. Caroline Ramsey, and Dr. Ruslan Ramanau. So I did my PhD in the UK in a town called Milton Keynes, very nice town. I enjoyed my experience there. And as part of my entrance into the PhD program, I had to come up with a proposal. And so what did I do? I borrowed from the weirdness. I borrowed from how I had been taught psychology, work psychology for that matter, from my undergraduate years. And then when I borrowed from that, what I then did was then I crafted a proposal. underpinned by all those ideas. And I wanted to measure something called vocational self-concept crystallization. It sounded so good on paper because, I mean, imagine a dissertation title is reading an investigation into vocational self-concept crystallization amongst working adults in the South African. I mean, the very vocational self-concept crystallization is a word that is laden with some heavy undertones, and the typical stuff that I would say, my examiner to see this would say, this is good stuff. And so I did all of that, prepared the proposal. I went and presented the proposal to a panel. And when I was presenting, one of the panelists said to me, the more you speak, and this person is not African, by the way, and by African, I'm talking about having been born and with geographical influence on the African continent. This person said to me, listen, please do us a favor. The more you're speaking, the more we keep on hearing Eurocentric and Western voices. Where is the distinctively African voice in your work? And for me, that was an embarrassment because I was in the United Kingdom. I had come there as this interesting project, if you like, amongst the three supervisors, in my view, of what it's like to supervise an African student. And here was a middle-aged British male telling me that my work was devoid of anything that has to do with my identity as an African. I was embarrassed. And so what then happened, which was fascinating, I went to my supervisors, and my supervisors asked me the question, so what can we do next to try and help you? I said, well, why don't I do a pilot study? Try and test out ideas of what I want to measure. And I remember it so well because the pilot study started when I boarded a flight from London Heathrow to OR Tambo. And the fascinating bit about that was that I started writing. And I started writing about some of the experiences. You can go and check out the article. It's on the Mail and Guardian. It's called The PhD, Don't Fake It, Just Be It. And in this process, I started my journey of an interest in working with narrative research, because I then became the subject of my own career pathing, if you like, through reflection of my own experiences as a scholar. And so when I got to this part of the world, I soon realized that one of the things that would happen would be having to be part of a process of engagement, a process of reflection, and a process of actually owning up to realize that I must be putting myself under scrutiny as a scholar in view of what I was trying to achieve. And so that was the first form of challenge that I went through in challenging the weirdness. And I framed this experience as the embarrassment. The next framing of reality was the awakening. Now, as part of the awakening, what I try to do here is to share the experience of what happened when I started now engaging and trying to realize that, well, I must start challenging even that which has been framed as part of my experience as a scholar. And what I then did here, I went and started asking questions. Some of the questions were not easy, and I went through some readings. And one such reading was the work of Lovemore Mbeki, who is a very celebrated scholar, used to be at Rhodes University, I think, and now is teaching overseas, who started explaining about how he started using Afro-related or Afrocentric concepts within his consulting practice. And he talks about the Ubuntu philosophy of management. And in the Ubuntu philosophy of management, he brings out ideas around saying in every organization, there is need of a heightened and conscientious attention to the issues such as understanding local culture and fixing ourselves and embedding ourselves and translate how local culture can be useful in informing the type of practices that we can come about with as scholars. And then that led me to another piece of work that I would recommend. This is written by a guy called David Witten. And everybody always cites this paper because even for my students, I always recommend they read this paper. This paper is called What Makes a Theoretical Contribution? And the argument that Witten makes in this paper is that one of the things that we must always do is keep this end goal in mind, that what is the contribution of what we are trying to do. And one of the things that happens with weirdness is that sometimes weirdness is about perpetuating what we already know to be the epochs of the foundation of what knowledge is. And what Witten is saying, that only when we keep this question in mind are we then able as scholars to self-examine and put ourselves on the anvil of personal critique to say, is our work informing the greater good of what we are trying to achieve? So the lesson there was that we shouldn't just accept but also challenge assumptions that are rooted within our disciplines. We need to feed our intellectual curiosity, and sometimes we get trapped in a methodological trap in which we need to free ourselves from, which is this tradition of how things are done, and we need to move away from that to actually frame a reality of saying, this is what we're going to work with in terms of challenging all these issues that we have at stake. So remember, in all of this, I'm not calling for a rejection of tradition, and I'm not calling for a movement away from weirdness, if you like, but really I'm asking the need to question, the need to continuously put even the very ideas of what has been the basis of our reasoning, of saying, what can we do to actually challenge the issues of weirdness that are around us. So that's Mbigi. We need to challenge the assumptions around us, but also within the discipline. Then the third point, there are 5 points, by the way, so I'm almost coming to an end. The third one was then the idea of going back to my roots. And now what I tried to do here was to then say, listen, perhaps maybe as a scholar, I shouldn't differentiate between the work I do and the community that I belong to. So I come from a community in Zimbabwe, which is just 27 km outside the capital of Harare, north of Harare, called Lomboshava. It's a very rich area in terms of granite stones and tourist attractions. And so there are several rock formations that are around, beautiful pieces of landmark. And but I started reading more about these areas that I'm from, in trying to learn more about what is it that I can pinpoint in terms of helping the work that I do. And I soon realized that within that history, there could be things and stuff that I could take that are important in framing my work as a scholar and moving away from weirdness. So for instance, the importance of time and place in our understanding of what knowledge is about. We shouldn't be afraid or ashamed of framing this reality in view of the challenges that are about us. Location is important. We also want to give voice to certain marginalized groupings of people who may not have had the opportunity to be given such voice. So remember, our focus is on society and the relationship amongst individuals within that society. And that in itself can be a contribution in terms of the epistemology and the ontology of how we frame reality. So the broad spectrum of reality is that as we move towards interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work, may we not forget where our work is located in the context that we reside in. Then number 4, the issue of measurement. So what does tradition what does tradition teach us in terms of measurement? Well, here's some interesting things about tradition. Tradition positions in psychology that there is only one way of doing research, or there's only one way of coming to an understanding. And this is where we've been taught in terms of history. We are taught to actually try and understand the reality of tradition by virtue of the issues that characterize sorry, let's just sort this out. The issues that characterize our framing of reality. And our framing of reality, going through my undergraduate classes, was the idea of taking a survey, an instrument, ticking a few boxes, and well, 90% of the people said the following, therefore, we have come to an understanding of what some form of truth is. Now, I've narrowed it and I've made it so simplistic. The issue is broader and more complex than that. But the issue that we need to take away here is that the issue of measurement is an important aspect of the work that we do as psychologists, is an important aspect of how we come to an understanding of what, if you like, in quotes, truth is, and an understanding of this truth. So the framing of this reality is then located in the idea that we need to empower ourselves in moving away from weirdness. We need to empower for more innovative and progressive methods of data collection. And if there's anything that we've learned from the past experiences of COVID, is that this is needed. We are not going to be in contact with sample groups anymore. As much as we would just go to people and say, please, could you fill out my survey? We need more innovative, more liberating, more emancipatory types of methods in how data is collected, or how we come to an understanding of what, in quotes, truth is all about. So we need to also borrow leaf from local and international researchers in how they are responding to these challenges. For instance, there's a lot of ethnographic work that is coming out within my discipline in the management sciences. A lot of people don't want to hear about that because they are used to the tradition and convention. So for someone to step up and say, hey, let's do it this way, for some people it is unfathomable and very difficult to step out of that paradigmatic type of lens of how reality is conceived and framed in our understanding of knowledge. So let's also evaluate the suitability of some of the experiences that we're going through, especially within a social science research context. Now, I remember in some cases giving participants or respondents questionnaires that I felt that they have no idea what some of the words in those questionnaires were. Super's idea of the vocational self-concept crystallization. How do you even translate or frame that understanding on a paradigm of a local community group that has no idea whatsoever a crystallization or self-concept that is crystallized is all about? So honest reflection. Are the methods of measurement that we are using speaking to what we are trying to achieve? And ultimately, what we are trying to achieve as psychologists is this idea of trying to improve the lived experiences of community groups, not to get ourselves published in Journal of Vocational Behavior or another prestigious journal, Personality and Differences, or something like that. That is important, yes, in terms of advancing knowledge and understanding. But in terms of the ultimate good, we must not leave our community groups the same way we found them after we've done our research, because we just take our surveys, we go and analyze the data. After we've analyzed the data, we write our dissertations, we write our papers, we graduate, and the community groups are still left the same way that they are. So the big question, Quo Vadis, which means where are you going, can only be answered through breaking tradition. Now that becomes critical and very unsettling for some. And the need for an imagined rather, let me say, a reimagined lens of how research should and can be conducted. The path of this is one that requires not only self-reflection, but importantly is driven by the ethos of impactful research, which is this idea I've been talking a lot about to students and prospective students who write to me saying, can we work with you? There can be no substitute for quality outside this. So finally, the fifth point, which I will harp about, is the necessity of proudly African research. One of the resolutions I've made in the last couple of years and which I've been trying to live up to is to engage more with material and information that is related to the African continent. Work more with scholars on the African continent, travel more on the African continent, and try and interact and engage more with scholars on the continent. And this has been a worthwhile and fruitful engagement, because what it has taught me then is the necessity of trying to understand your own local basing or your own local grounding in challenging weirdness. Now, of course, Africa is not one homogeneous place, but what I've learned in the experience of traveling through the continent is that experiences around the different African scholars, differing as they may be, are actually uniquely interwoven together and can actually help us. So for instance, when I'm in Uganda, for instance, or when I'm in Kenya, or when I'm in Zambia, and I'm interacting with work psychologists and industrial psychologists, you tend to get a picture of the uniqueness of that particular context, but it also offers you a moment of self-reflection that you can actually do to advance understanding and challenge some of the stereotypes that you may have. But I am not only arguing for African research, that's proudly African research, but we must not forget that the first person that we must, if you like, preach to and convert should be the other. And in this case, the other refers to the tradition of how we have been taught research, the tradition of how we have been grounded as scholars, which is this idea of weirdness that I was talking to. It is not enough for us to just position the importance of African research that is not engaging and making a contribution, a conversation, if you like, to the things that are happening in reality on a broader scale. And that then becomes critical. So my advice as I finish this presentation is, please, can we stop being weird? And in doing so, we can actually find space, volume, and latitude to be able to share our ideas in a non-judgmental, but also a relaxed atmosphere, where we are not only making a difference through the work that we do, but we are making a difference through the people who are informed by this work. And that, for me, is what responsible psychology should be about, moving away from weirdness. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Prof, for the amazing presentation and also your reflection on your own experience. So we're going to open the floor up to any questions and discussion points, if there are any. You may switch on your mic.
My mic, or the colleagues?
The participants that have joined us.
Okay.
Hello.
Professor, can I go? Fatima?
Can you go?
Hi, Professor. I'd like to thank you for the awesome presentation. Thank you for calling us out on our weirdness and the struggle which we all have, pertaining to remaining true to our identity and trying to dismantle what has been ingrained into our heads via the education system. system that is so hard now to undo. I liked when you were talking about what makes a theoretical contribution worthwhile for our communities. And I would just like you to elaborate, maybe suggest one way in which we can ensure that the work we do is contextual. Would you can also please do me one favor, and if you can, to just write down the name of that article that you are referring to, what makes a theoretical contribution, so that all of us can cite it or go read further on it. Thank you.
Okay, can I answer Fatima, and then, or should we take another question?
You can answer.
Okay, so thanks a lot for that question. I want to share an experience, particularly in view of the question that has been asked. So what I try to do nowadays, whatever research that I'm doing, I try to ask myself a question. Have I been on the ground to be able to see what is informing my decision to conduct this research? And I think that becomes important and critical, because what usually happens is that, and I work with students, and students will just go and frame such a topic. I want to investigate the influence of stress on job performance. But then I say, well, hold on, take a step back. Go back and ask yourself a question. Is this research speaking to the idea of what is empirically easy for you to do, or is it speaking to a reality that is happening on the ground? And I learned this the hard way, because I'm currently applying for a fellowship with Cambridge University, with a scholar there that we're collaborating. And he asked me all these questions to say, okay, you want to work with me, that's great. But this research that you're doing, could you please answer me in short point form? Why do you want to do this research, and what is the impact of this research? So in the article by Wheaton, the argument, therefore, is to present different, he calls them building blocks of how theory is formed. But the underlying premise is that by keeping this question in mind, what ultimately is going to be the benefit of the work that I'm doing in view of the communities that I reside. And this is where this idea I said earlier on of responsible psychology or responsible research that is informed by gaps that are real to real life human beings, not gaps that are framed by basically what is empirically easy for you to do to get a qualification or funding to that nature. And then finally, in answering your question as well, I can make available the article. You can just Google it. I think it's one of the most read articles from the Academy of Management Review. Finally, one of the things that's interesting there is Wheaton is also encouraging people like me and you and everybody here to say, we have an opportunity to be able to be part of a process of coming up with theories of our own that speak exactly to challenges that are specific to our community. So think of any theory in psychology that has been taught to you. The building blocks of that theory is some of the work that you and I do on a day-to-day basis as we conduct research. And what we just need is that we need more people in the Americas and in Asia quoting theories that are specific to our context as a lesson board for their work that they are doing in their communities. Sadly and regrettably, the opposite is what is happening. We quote more of the work outside than the work inside our own contextual realm.
Thanks, Prof. Very insightful.
Are there any other questions? Prof, you wanted to say something?
Just to thank everybody for joining us, and I hope that I have not been weird in my presentation, and I hope that we are challenged to continue to do the great work that we are doing. And thank you for sparing time from your busy schedules to be able to come to listen to me.
Thank you very much. So if there aren't any other questions, we will stop here for now. Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye.